There are a lot of ways to find out somebody thinks they own a piece of your life. Sometimes it's a phone call. Sometimes it's a knock on the door. In my case, it was a letter. And by the time I finished reading it, I realized a group of strangers had decided they were going to tell me what I could do on land my family had owned longer than most of them had lived in the county. The envelope showed up on a Thursday morning, tucked between a feed supplier catalog and a utility bill. Nothing about it looked urgent, but something about the weight of it caught my attention. Maybe you've had that feeling before, when a piece of paper somehow feels heavier than paper should. I opened it standing right there at my kitchen counter. By the second paragraph, my coffee didn't taste the same. According to the Cedar Creek Estates Homeowners Association, my timber harvesting operation was in violation of community preservation standards. Immediate suspension was required. Equipment removal was expected. Further action could be taken if I failed to comply. I remember reading the thing twice, then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it, because I couldn't believe it. See, my name is Ethan Walker, and my family owns a few hundred acres north of Blackstone Ridge, Tennessee. We've worked that land for decades. My grandfather bought the first parcel after coming home from the military. My father expanded it. I grew up on it. Every fence line, every creek crossing, every stand of pine and oak. I knew them like most people know their own neighborhoods. The HOA sending me that letter? They didn't own 1 square foot of it. Not one. I tossed the letter onto the passenger seat of my truck and drove straight out to the active cut zone. The sound of chainsaws echoed through the trees long before I arrived. Log loaders moved with their usual rhythm. Crew members were doing exactly what they'd been hired to do. Everything was legal. Everything was permitted. Everything had been planned months in advance. My foreman, a guy named Hank Mercer, spotted me pulling in. Now Hank was one of those men who somehow looked 50 and 70 at the same time. Tough as railroad steel, impossible to impress, and usually the calmest person in any room. He walked over and took one look at my face. "What's wrong?" he asked. I handed him the letter. He read it. Halfway through, he lowered the page. "You serious?" "Apparently." He finished reading and looked toward the ridge where Cedar Creek Estates sat behind rows of decorative trees and expensive rooftops. "They know this ain't their property, right?" "I would have thought so." He shook his head and laughed once. Not because it was funny, because sometimes ridiculous things don't leave you any other option. For a minute, we stood there listening to the equipment running. Then I said something neither of us wanted to hear. "Shut it down." His head snapped toward me. "What?" "Temporary. Ethan, we got contracts lined up." "I know. We've got crews scheduled." "I know. We lose this weather window, and we're going to be chasing delays all winter." I looked back at the letter. I know. The truth was, every instinct I had wanted to ignore it. Fire the operation back up. Keep working. Let them figure out they had no authority. But I've learned something over the years. The people who cause the most trouble usually want you angry. Angry people make mistakes. I didn't know what game they were playing yet. And until I did, I wasn't giving them anything. Within an hour, the site went quiet. One machine after another powered down. The silence felt strange, almost unnatural, like the forest itself was waiting to see what happened next. That evening, after the crews left, I sat in my office surrounded by maps, permits, environmental reports, land surveys, easement documents, and every piece of paperwork connected to the property. Around sunset, I finally called the number listed on the letter. After 2 transfers and a receptionist who sounded terrified of making decisions, I got connected to the person who signed it. Her name was Victoria Hale, president of the Cedar Creek Estates HOA. And before that conversation ended, I realized the letter wasn't the real problem. Victoria was. Because the confidence in her voice wasn't the confidence of someone asking questions. It was the confidence of someone who had already decided she was right. Mr. Walker. The moment I heard her voice, I could picture exactly what kind of person she was. Controlled. Polished. The kind of person who never raised her voice because she didn't think she needed to. Victoriale. I asked. Yes. I'm calling about the notice you sent. I assumed you might. There was something about the way she said it that immediately got under my skin. Not rude. Not openly hostile. Just certain that she was in charge. Certain that this conversation would go her way. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the office window toward the darkening tree line. "Help me understand something," I said. "How exactly does your HOA think it has authority over property that's not part of your development. There was a brief pause, not because she didn't have an answer, because she had rehearsed one. We've received numerous complaints from residents regarding the environmental and visual impact of your logging activities. I almost laughed. Visual impact? The clear cutting is visible from several homes. It's selective harvesting. Regardless, residents are concerned. Concerned about what? The character of the community. I remember staring at the wall for a second. The character of the community. That phrase somehow irritated me more than anything else she'd said, because I knew exactly what it meant. People had bought expensive houses with mountain views. Now they were looking at working land and suddenly deciding they preferred scenery without the work that created it. My property isn't part of your community. We believe certain development agreements may give us standing. You believe? Our legal committee is reviewing the matter. That was the moment something clicked. She wasn't speaking from certainty. She was speaking from assumption. A dangerous assumption. One she expected me to accept without question. Victoria, I said calmly, I've already reviewed every agreement tied to that property. I'm sure you have. And there's nothing in them giving your HOA authority over my operation. Silence. Then she answered carefully. We expect compliance while the issue is being reviewed. Expected. There was that word again. Not requested. Expected. Like obedience was already part of the arrangement. I ended the call a few minutes later, but the conversation stayed with me. Not because I was worried, because something fell off. If this was really about environmental concerns, why start with legal threats? Why not a meeting? Why not a conversation? Why not simply pick up the phone before sending demands? No, something else was driving this. I just hadn't figured out what. The next week passed quietly. Too quietly. The logging operation remained suspended. Hank wasn't happy about it. Neither were the crews. Every day equipment sat idle cost money. Every day delayed contracts. Every day chipped away at schedules we'd spent months building. But I stayed patient. And while I waited, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. One afternoon, I drove through Cedar Creek Estates. Not for confrontation. Observation. There's a difference. Nobody stopped me. Nobody questioned me. I was just another pickup truck rolling through clean streets lined with identical mailboxes and perfectly trimmed landscaping. The neighborhood looked exactly like the brochures developers hand out when they're selling a dream. Young trees, stone entrances, decorative street lamps, everything designed to feel permanent. But the more I drove through it, the more I noticed little cracks beneath the surface. Not physical cracks, practical ones. The entire development relied on a single paved road that wound down through a narrow valley before connecting with the county highway. Now, if you've lived in mountain country long enough, you know valleys have a habit of becoming problems. Flooding, ice, mudslides, downed trees. Nature doesn't care about engineering presentations. Nature does what it wants. And that road had problems. I knew because I'd seen them. For years. Long before Cedar Creek Estates existed. Long before the first foundation was poured. Back when the area was mostly timber and pasture, my father had built an elevated ridge road across our property. Originally, it served logging crews. Later, it became something more. When storms hit and the valley route became dangerous, local residents used the ridge road as an alternate path. Nothing formal. No contracts. No signs. Just common sense. One neighbor helping another. The way rural communities usually work. I parked near the northern edge of my property and climbed out. The air carried that sharp autumn chill that tells you winter is already on its way, even if the calendar hasn't admitted it yet. Standing there, I could see everything. The paved subdivision road, the valley below, my ridge road disappearing into the trees. And then it hit me, not all at once, more like a slow realization settling into place. Cedar Creek Estates had exactly one dependable emergency access route. Mine. I actually stood there for several seconds staring at the connection. The entire development. 42 homes. Families. Delivery trucks. Emergency vehicles. School buses. All of them depended on a road crossing property owned by the same man they just tried to shut down. The irony was almost beautiful. But here's the thing. The discovery didn't make me happy. It made me thoughtful. Because power is a strange thing. Most people think power comes from authority. Titles, rules, committees, official letters. Sometimes it does, but sometimes power comes from something much simpler. dependency. And the people with the most power are often the ones who don't realize they have it until someone challenges them. That night, Hank stopped by the house. We sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee while darkness settled outside. "You found something, didn't you?" he asked. I looked at him. "What makes you say that?" "You got that look." "What look?" "The one you get when somebody else is about to learn a lesson." I laughed. "Maybe." His eyes narrowed. "What did you find?" I told him about the road, the access issue, the valley route, everything. By the time I finished, he leaned back in his chair and whistled. "No kidding. No kidding." A grin slowly appeared on his face. "So what now?" I took a sip of coffee, then another. The answer came easier than I expected. "Nothing. Nothing. Not a thing." His grin disappeared. "Ethan, I'm serious. You could bury them with this. Maybe. You could force them to back down tomorrow. Maybe. So why aren't we?" I looked out the window toward the darkness beyond the porch light. Because the truth was simple. If I used the road as leverage right now, I'd become exactly what they already believed I was. A selfish landowner protecting his interests. No, that wasn't the move. The move was patience. Winter was coming. And winter had a way of teaching lessons better than any argument ever could. A few days later, the first forecasts started appearing. Meteorologists talking about unusually strong storms. Early snow, heavy accumulation. Nothing guaranteed, but enough to get people's attention. Enough to make preparations. Enough to make me wonder whether Cedar Creek Estates had any idea how fragile their position really was. Because if they didn't, they were about to find out. The first storm arrived faster than anyone expected. One day the hills were brown and quiet. The next, the entire county disappeared beneath a blanket of snow. I woke before sunrise and drove out toward the ridge. The world looked different under fresh snow. Cleaner somehow. Quieter. The usual sounds of machinery and traffic have been replaced by the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. When I reached the valley road, I wasn't surprised by what I saw. Slush underneath. Ice on top. Vehicles moving cautiously. A couple already stranded along the shoulder. Exactly the kind of mess I'd expected. Then I drove up toward the ridge road. Different story. Snow-covered, sure, but solid. Stable. Reliable. The way it had always been. Around noon, I noticed a plow truck from Cedar Creek Estates parked near the property line. The driver sat there for nearly 20 minutes. Never crossed onto my land. Never attempted to proceed. Eventually, he turned around and left. That evening, my phone rang. I didn't need to check the caller ID. Mr. Walker. Victoria. Her voice sounded different. Still controlled. Still professional. But now there was tension underneath it. The confidence was still there. The certainty wasn't. "We're experiencing access issues due to the weather," she said. "I heard. Our maintenance crews need temporary use of the ridge road." I walked to the kitchen window and looked out into the darkness. For a second, I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because I wanted her to hear the silence. Wanted her to feel the weight of what she was asking. "The ridge road runs through my property." "Yes. The property your HOA attempted to shut down." Another silence. Longer this time. "This is a public safety matter." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. And my operation wasn't. Her exhale came through the phone. Slow. Controlled. But frustrated. "We're willing to discuss your concerns." Funny how quickly the language had changed. A month ago, they were issuing demands. Now, they were discussing concerns. A month ago, they expected compliance. Now, they were requesting cooperation. Power shifts rarely happen all at once. Usually they happen word by word, sentence by sentence, one uncomfortable realization at a time. "We'll talk soon," she finally said. Then the line went dead. The second storm hit 4 days later, and that's when everything changed. The snowfall doubled. Temperatures dropped. The valley route became nearly unusable. County crews worked nonstop and still couldn't keep up. Reports started spreading around town. Residents stuck at home. Medical appointments canceled. Delivery trucks turning around. School transportation delayed. By the third day, Cedar Creek Estates looked less like a luxury community and more like an island. That morning, I drove to the property line again. This time, there were people gathered there. Residents. Maintenance workers. 2 plow trucks. Several SUVs. Everyone standing around looking at the same problem. And then I saw Victoria. She wasn't standing behind a boardroom table anymore. No kerfeli drafti notices. No official letterhead. Just a woman wearing winter boots and a heavy coat, walking through the snow toward a situation she could no longer control. When she reached the edge of my property, she stopped. Mr. Walker. Victoria. The wind moved through the trees behind us. Nobody else spoke. You could feel every eye watching, waiting, wondering how this was going to end. Finally, she broke the silence. We need to resolve this. I nodded. Looks that way. She glanced back toward the blocked roadway. The lower route is unsafe. I know. We have residents who can't leave. I know. Emergency response times are becoming a concern. I know. Each answer landed a little harder than the last. Not because I was trying to embarrass her, because I'd known all of this before the first snowflake fell. And so had she. She just hadn't realized it yet. For the first time since we'd met, Victoria looked tired. Not weak, not defeated, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from realizing a problem can't be solved through authority alone. We made mistakes, she said quietly. That got my attention, because people in positions of power rarely say those words, especially in public, especially in front of witnesses. I didn't respond. I let her continue. We received complaints. Residents were angry. Property owners were worried about what they were seeing. We reacted too quickly. Too quickly. That was one way to describe it. We should have spoken with you first. The crowd behind her remained silent. Listening. Watching. Learning. I folded my arms. What exactly do you want from me? The answer came immediately. No rehearsed speech. No legal language. No committee-approved statement. We need access. Simple. Honest. Human. For the first time since this entire thing started, she wasn't speaking as HOA president. She was speaking as a neighbor. And that changed everything. I thought about my father. About all the years he'd spent teaching me that ownership wasn't just about rights. It was about responsibility. Anybody can slam a gate shut. Anybody can use leverage. The harder thing is knowing when not to. Finally, I spoke. My crews go back to work. She nodded. Done. No more notices. Done. No more attempts to control land that doesn't belong to your association. Another pause. Then she nodded again. Done. I looked toward the waiting plow trucks, toward the residents standing in the cold, toward people who honestly had nothing to do with the decisions that created this mess. Then I stepped aside. Just one step. That was all. The lead plow driver started his engine. A deep diesel rumble echoed through the winter air. Slowly, carefully, the truck crossed onto my property. Nobody cheered. Nobody applauded. Real life rarely works like that. But you could feel something shift. A tension that had been building for weeks, finally breaking apart. One truck became two. Two became three. Before long, crews were moving through the ridge road, clearing snow and restoring access. The standoff was over. A few days later, the official notice was rescinded. My operation resumed. The crews returned. Chainsaws echoed through the forest again. Life moved forward. And yet something had changed. Not just for me. For everyone. A couple weeks after everything settled, Hank stopped by the site. We stood overlooking the active cut area while equipment worked below. He watched for a while before speaking. Think they learned anything? I smiled. Maybe. That's all. That's all. He laughed. You waited an awful long time for maybe. Sometimes maybe is enough. The truth is, I never hated Victoria. I never hated the HOA. I think they made a mistake. A big one. But mistakes happen when people start believing authority and wisdom are the same thing. They aren't. Not even close. Authority comes from titles. Wisdom comes from understanding consequences. And consequences have a funny way of introducing themselves when nobody else can. So now I'm curious what you think. If you had been standing where I stood, holding that first letter in your hand, would you have shut the operation down and waited? Or would you have fought back immediately? And if you were in Victoria's position, trying to protect a community you believed was being threatened, would you have acted any differently? Who was right? Who was wrong? Or is the truth somewhere in the uncomfortable space between those two things? Let me know down in the comments. Because out here, the most interesting arguments usually start after the story ends.